Emmerdale teased that, from the moment dawn's pale light crept across the patchwork fields of the Dales, a storm was quietly gathering on the horizon. Cain Dingle stood at the edge of his weather-beaten yard, the autumn air crisp against his skin, and in his eyes burned a determination that could not be quenched. Word had reached him that the Tate family, those polished aristocrats of Home Farm, were once again stirring trouble, this time with designs on the Dingle homestead itself. It was impossible to ignore. Invitations to conflict had come, veiled in threats and bribes, but Cain heard them for what they truly were, a gauntlet cast at his feet. He clenched his fist and declared, as if invoking the very spirit of his ancestors, that he would face the Tates head-on, no matter the cost. From the moment Joe Tate arrived in the village, the simmering tensions between Home Farm and the Dingle clan had grown steadily more toxic. Joe, with his iridescent charm and razor-sharp intelligence, seemed to possess an uncanny ability to twist situations to his advantage. He had leaned on Moira Dingle, pressuring her to relinquish ownership of the family farm to his Aunt Kim, promising her security and peace if she capitulated. Yet beneath his glossy exterior lay a calculating predator, a man who saw relationships as assets to be traded, and loyalties as mere obstacles on the path to power. Moira, proud and fiercely protective of her legacy, refused to bow. Each refusal only sharpened Joe's hunger for dominance. Late one afternoon, as golden shafts of sunlight cut through the low-hanging clouds, Moira found herself face to face with Joe in the barn. Bales of hay towered overhead like silent witnesses. He offered her a final, sweet-toned ultimatum: sign the papers, hand over the deed, and immediately secure her future. Otherwise, he warned, the consequences would be severe. Moira's heart hammered. She knew that this farm was more than land and buildings. It was her children's memories, the echo of her husband's voice, the lifeblood of her family. With trembling fingers, she shook her head. Joe's smile thinned, his gaze flicking to the dark shapes in the corners of the barn, as though daring her to stand defiant in his presence. And she did. Word of Joe's coercion spread quickly through the Dingle network. Lydia, Moira's courageous teenage daughter, watched her mother's struggle with fierce loyalty swirling in her chest. She had come to respect Joe, until this moment. Now, she saw him for the manipulator he truly was. Lydia's sense of justice stirred to life. In the following days, as tensions rose, she confronted Joe outside the pub, demanding he leave her family alone. His answer was a fist to her cheek that sent her spinning backwards, blood mingling with tears on her face. The crowd that had gathered gasped in horror as Lydia crumpled to her knees. Cain, who had been returning from the fields, rushed forward and hauled Lydia into his arms, fury igniting inside him like wildfire. When Sam Dingle learned that Lydia had been struck, he felt his loyalties being yanked in two directions. On one side stood Joe Tate, the man who had rewarded him for shady errands and helped smooth over Dingle missteps with his polished influence. On the other lay his family, battered and bruised but unbowed, their love and blood ties he could not deny. That evening at the Woolpack, Sam watched Cain's face as the older man spoke in hushed tones, his voice a low growl. "You've got to choose, lad," Cain said, placing a heavy hand on Sam's shoulder. "Are you with your family, or are you with them?" Sam's gut twisted. He'd always prided himself on loyalty above all else, but loyalty wasn't a simple thing when pitted against ambition and promise. In the days that followed, every encounter between Sam and Joe crackled with unspoken tension. Joe summoned Sam to Home Farm, conferred with him behind closed doors, offered him a share in the Tate empire if he would simply turn a blind eye to Lydia's injury. But Sam had seen the fear in Lydia's eyes, the tremor that ran through Moira's voice as she replayed the moment again and again. He couldn't ignore it. When Cain caught wind of these clandestine meetings, he confronted Sam beneath the ancient oaks that lined the path to the Dingle homestead. The sky was heavy with rain, and thunder rumbled overhead as if echoing Cain's wrath. "You take one more step towards Joe and his ilk," Cain warned, his jaw clenched and his knuckles white, "and you'll wish you hadn't." Sam's heart pounded, but before he could answer, Cain's fist shot out and landed squarely on his cheek, a thunderous crack that flung Sam backwards. Blood blossomed on Sam's lip. The rain began to fall, mingling with the salt of his tears. Moira, having learned of Cain's assault on Sam, confronted him in the yard, her eyes blazing with disbelief and anger. "You slapped him," she spat, her voice shaking. Cain, his chest heaving, refused to meet her gaze. "He was making the wrong choice," he said gruffly, as if that excused everything. Moira took a step forward, her fists clenching. She struck at Cain, not with the force of a trained fighter, but with the desperation of a mother defending her own. Her punch caught him off guard, but in the chaos of motion, her fist connected with Lydia, who had crept forward in hopes of stopping the fight. Lydia cried out as pain seared through her jaw. Silence fell as everyone froze, the truth hanging heavy between them. Joe, who had been watching from the doorway, seized the moment to strike. He lunged at Sam, fists flashing, and rained blows on the younger man until Sam's resolve wavered. Each punch forced a shift in Sam's loyalties, twisting his heart until he could barely stand. Cain watched impassively, the storm outside mirrored by the turmoil within, and then leaned down to Lydia's ear. "Don't you dare press charges," he hissed, his voice a predator's purr. "You do this, and you'll bring the full fury of the Tates down on us all." Moira whirled on Cain, her eyes wild. "You didn't threaten her, did you?" she demanded. Cain's face darkened, but his voice came soft, almost remorseful. "No, not at all." Yet the hardness in his eyes betrayed him. He turned away, shoulders stiff, leaving Moira to kneel beside Lydia, whose tears mixed with raindrops. The barn's rafters creaked overhead, as if sighing in sorrow. In the hush that followed, whispered fragments of conversation drifted through the yard. No one spoke of suing, of pressing charges, of restitution. The unspoken truce held as a fragile barrier between weeks of mounting fury and the abyss of outright warfare. But the damage was done. Sam and Lydia, bound by shared pain, retreated to the far end of the yard, their backs turned to Cain and Moira. The air between them was thick with betrayal and grief. It was as if the very land itself mourned the rending of these ties, the grove of oaks bending under the weight of a sorrow too vast to bear. And so, in the damp stillness of that storm-slapped afternoon, Emmerdale's fields felt smaller, the horizon narrower. The Dingles and the Tates, once neighbors with cautious respect, now stood on opposite sides of a chasm that threatened to swallow them all. Loyalties had fractured, fists had flown, and innocence had been lost in a flurry of anger and pain. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again, and that the true battle for the Dingle farm was just beginning. Cain's threat hung over the Dingle homestead like the lingering murk of storm clouds, just after rainfall, and by the time dusk settled over the valley, the chill in the air carried more than the coming of night. It bore the weight of fractured loyalties and wounded pride. In the kitchen, the warm glow of the Aga did little to thaw the tension among the family. Moira hovered near the breadboard, her hands pressed together as though in silent prayer. Lydia nursed her bruised jaw, a smudge of blood still at the corner of her mouth, while Sam sat at the farmhouse table with his forearms braced on its centuries-worn surface. Neither spoke, the only sound the low hiss of the kettle and the distant bleating of sheep. They had retreated here, away from prying eyes, to assess their wounds, both physical and emotional, and to wonder what came next. Each heart beat out a different rhythm. Moira's was fear-laced with fierce resolve, Lydia's a brittle pride tempered by hurt. Sam's a turmoil of regret and confusion. In the muted kitchen light, they stared at the chipped crockery as though it held the answers to questions that had no clear response. "Sam," Lydia said at last, her voice barely above a whisper, "you said you'd stand by us." Her eyes, swollen but bright, bore into him with the intensity of a child betrayed. Is that still true? Sam's gaze wavered. He looked up, meeting her stare with shame in his own. I am with you, he said hoarsely, but I need to figure out what that means. He ran a hand through his hair, his usual boyish confidence eroded by guilt. I know I let things go too far. Moira rose and placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. We know you're torn, lad. But this, she swept her arm toward Lydia, this isn't the sort of loyalty we can accept. Your family. You stick by us. Outside, lightning flashed across the purpling sky, illuminating the windows briefly. The thunder that followed was a distant drumroll to the drama unfolding within these walls. Meanwhile, at home farm, Joe Tate paced the marble corridors of the grand foyer, phone pressed to his ear. His every movement was precise, measured, an actor in a play of his own devising. He spoke curtly into the receiver. Yes. I want the meeting scheduled for first thing in the morning. And ensure that, yes, I understand. He hung up and let out a slow breath. The walls around him were opulent, but stifling, the silence oppressive. He strode to the window overlooking the courtyard, where his family's crest flew atop a flagpole. Joe's mind circled back to his confrontation with Kane, Moira, and Lydia. He replayed Lydia's defiance, her refusal to bow, the flush of injury on her face. He admired her spirit even as he chastised himself for allowing his temper to slip. But every move in this game of power carried risk, and personal involvement was the highest risk of all. Downstairs, his Aunt Kim Tate awaited him. Draped in black silk, she epitomized regal disdain. Her expression was unreadable as she sipped a glass of red wine. You looked furious, she observed without preamble. I was, Joe admitted, descending the stairs. Their stubbornness is infuriating. He ran a hand through his dark hair. But we're not without options. Tomorrow, Mr. Sanderson from the bank goes through the legal loopholes again. Then we press the farm's lien. Moira won't have a choice. Kim smiled, lips thin. And what about Kane's menace? He's rallied half the village against us with that slap. Joe's jaw tightened. Don't underestimate me. We'll handle Kane. But Moira, she's our next step. We aim at her soft spot. In that moment, Joe believed he held all the cards. Yet fate has a way of reshuffling the deck when you least expect it. Back at the Dingle farm, night deepened and Lydia lay in her room, propped against pillows, her thoughts racing. The sting in her jaw was slight compared to the ache of seeing her family divided, of Sam's doubts, of Kane's veiled threats. She pressed a hand to her cheek and closed her eyes, remembering the moment she confronted Joe, standing up for what was right, only to feel the firm blow to her face. She wondered if it had been worth it, to challenge Home Farm's ruler and risk fracturing her own family. But beneath that doubt lay something firmer, a conviction that she would never again be silenced. The bruise would heal, she told herself, what mattered was the spark it kindled. She vowed, in the darkness, to keep that spark alive, for her mother, for Sam, for the Dingle legacy. In the meantime, Sam crept quietly to her door. He knocked softly. Lydia. She opened her door, eyes wary. What is it? He stepped inside and sat on the edge of her bed. I'm sorry, he said, voice thick. I should never have. I don't know how I let it get this far. Lydia studied him. I know you're torn between Joe and us, she said. But you have to decide which side you want to be on. Because if you stay neutral, it still hurts us. Sam nodded. I know. He paused. I'm going to speak to Kane. Be careful, she warned. I will. Dawn arrived cold and grey. Heavy mist clung to the fields, veiling the cattle in ghost-like shapes. Kane stood at the gate, boots planted firmly in the sodden earth, his breath pluming in the morning air. Sam approached, shoulders hunched against the chill. "All right," Kane said without preamble. His voice was low, but there was curiosity in his tone. He had expected anger, bitterness, but saw only a weary resolution in Sam's eyes. Sam drew a breath. "I'm with you," he said. "No more deals with Joe Tate." Kane nodded once, sharply. "Good. Because the family stands as one." He clapped Sam on the shoulder, so hard it made the younger man stumble. "We'll figure out how to send Tate packing." But Sam's eyes flickered beyond Kane's back, toward Home Farm's towers looming on the horizon. He felt the burden of his decision settle like a stone in his gut. That afternoon, Moira and Kane convened a family council in the living room. Lydia sat between them, her head wrapped in a soft scarf, and Sam beside her. The Aga smoked quietly in the kitchen grate, filling the room with comfort that belied their predicament. Moira spread out a sheaf of papers on the coffee table, bank statements, legal notices, and the deed to the farm. "Joe's hired the best lawyers," she said. "He's using every loophole." Lydia traced a finger along the lines of the deed. "If he takes full control, where does that leave us?" Moira's gaze turned to Kane, who stood by the mantel, arms crossed. "We fight back," he said simply. Moira sighed. "Kane, we're not dealing with the Sugdens anymore. These are corporate sharks." Kane took a step forward. "Then let's be sharks of our own." He began to pace. "First, we call in old favors. There are people in this village, farmers, contractors, who owe the Dingles. They'll stand with us if we show them how Tate's methods threaten them all." Sam spoke up. "And if brute force, fists, won't work, then what? A legal battle?" Kane's mouth twisted. "I loathe lawyers. But sometimes you gotta play by the rules you hate. I'll find someone who hates Tate even more." Lydia tilted her head. "What if we go public? Get the press on our side?" Moira's expression brightened. "That could shame him. Joe hates bad publicity." A plan began to form, cobbled together from anger, desperation, and hope. They would gather witness statements, especially about Lydia's assault, bring the matter to the local paper, and pressure Joe into backing down. Then they would rally the community, reminding villagers of the Dingles' generosity, and of Kim Tate's history of ruthless takeovers. Kane's grin was feral. "I like it." Across the way, Joe Tate received his morning briefing. Mr. Sanderson confirmed that the lien process was moving ahead, and Home Farm's accountants were preparing for an aggressive push. Joe settled back in his leather chair, confident that any Dingle counterattack would be half-hearted at best. He tapped his fingers on the mahogany desk. He'd just instructed his PR consultant to prepare a statement about Lydia's unfortunate accident, artfully deflecting blame away from Home Farm, when his phone buzzed again. It was a text from Kim. "The Dingles have contacted the Chronicle." He cursed under his breath. The village paper was small, but local sentiment could be a powerful weapon. His mind raced. How quickly could he spin this? How fast would the headline hit? That afternoon, the Dingles gathered at the Chronicle office, their hearts pounding as the reporter took notes. Lydia, looking weary but determined, recounted every detail of Joe's assault. Sam backed her up, describing how he'd witnessed Lydia step forward to defend her mother, only to be struck coldly in the cheek. Moira provided evidence of Joe's intimidation tactics, and Kane, unrepentant, spoke bluntly about Joe's bullying of a family. By evening, the first edition went to print. The headline was blunt: "Dingle daughter injured in confrontation with Home Farm heir." The article laid out both sides, quoting the Dingles' claims and Joe's carefully worded denial. Photos of Lydia with her cheek bruised and Moira's resolute expression accompanied the text. As copies of the Chronicle made their way through the village, conversations ignited in the Woolpack, on the streets, and outside the school gates. The tide of public opinion began to shift. Even Joe's allies at Home Farm felt the ripple. That night, Joe confronted Kim in the privacy of his office. "They went to print," he said, voice tight. "This could sink the whole operation." Kim raised an eyebrow. "We knew the risk. But I didn't expect them to be this ruthless," Joe snapped. "They played the victim well." Kim took a slow sip of wine. "Then return fire." Joe hesitated. He could commission a smear campaign, dig up dirt on the Dingles, but against Lydia's purity of image and Sam's reputation, as a village good guy, it would look like a desperate, dirty trick. He clenched his fists. "I need a better strategy." Kim studied him. "Why don't you try reason?" Joe laughed, bitterly. "With the Dingles." Reason left the building when Kane slugged Sam. Kim tipped her head. Perhaps a show of force, one they can't deny, would remind them who's in control. Joe thought of the bank lien, of the legal machinery grinding in his favor. He pictured the Dingle farm, the fields stripped from Moira's hands, the name Tate hoisted above the district. A ruthless calm settled over him. "Prepare everything," he said. "Tomorrow, we move to take the farm." That night, Kane and Moira lay awake in their bedroom, the hush broken by the owl's cry from the lane. Moira stared at the ceiling. "What if it's too much?" she whispered. "What if we can't stop him?" Kane reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Then we keep fighting. We don't go down without a fight." She turned to him, eyes shining in the dark. "Promise me you'll be careful." He kissed her forehead. "I promise." Meanwhile, Lydia and Sam met by the ancient stone wall that marked the boundary of the Dingle fields. The moon cast long shadows, and the mist drifted low. Sam took Lydia's hand. "I'm sorry you got caught in the crossfire." She leaned into him. "I'd do it again." He pulled her close. "We'll get through this." She smiled, though tears glistened in her eyes. Together. As the farmyard lay silent under the watchful stars, both families braced for the coming storm. They had marshaled their allies, sharpened their wills, and drawn their battle lines in the muddy fields of Emmerdale. None could say who would emerge victorious, only that the struggle for the soul of the Dingle farm, and for justice in the valley, was far from over. The next dawn would bring the first salvo, bank officers arriving, tractors halted, and the rolling roar of the village's voices rising in defense or condemnation. And at the center of it all, Kane Dingle stood ready to face whatever came, his family's fate intertwined with every breath he drew. Underneath the murmur of wind through the trees, a simple truth echoed in the darkness: when blood and land are at stake, love and loyalty can be the strongest weapons of all. And the battle for Emmerdale's heart had only just begun.